Following new developments in both the global and domestic economy, the federal government of Nigeria is seeking a review of the 2022 Fiscal Framework on which the 2022 budget is based. President Muhammadu Buhari, in a letter written to the House of Representatives, disclosed that the total budget deficit is projected to increase from 965.42 billion naira to 7.35 trillion naira, representing 3.99% of the GDP, as the increment of deficit will be financed by new borrowings from the domestic market. The adjustment to the 2022 fiscal framework includes an increase in the projected oil price benchmark by $11 per barrel, from $62 per barrel to $73 per barrel. A reduction in projected oil production volume by 283,000 barrels per day, from 1.883 million barrels per day to 1.6 million barrels per day. An increase in the estimated provision for PMS subsidy for 2022 by 3.57 trillion naira, from 442.72 billion naira to 4 trillion naira. Well, let's break this down and understand what it means for Nigeria's economy, particularly at this time where we grapple to even get revenue. Senior Manager, Tax and Regulatory Services at Deloitte, Ibironke Onio, now joins me. It's good to see you. Thank you very much for your time.
Hi, Tolu. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me on the show.
Good afternoon. Now, the federal government says the 2022 spending plan, the budget deficit in that plan is jumping to about 7.35 trillion naira. Some even say it's more. I've seen some calculations even more than that. But let me ask you, what does this mean for this budget?
Okay. Thank you very much, Tolu. So we know that the initial budget deficit initially was about 6.4 trillion. With the increased spending increased borrowing that the government has said they want to do, which is about 965 billion, that takes us the borrowing to about 7.3 trillion. And we know what this has on our capital spend, right? If you look at what the way the budget has been, expenditure budget has been set, they're supposed to spend about 5.4 trillion on capital expenditure. Recurrent expenditure is over 6 trillion. And right now, with the increase in borrowing, the major driver for our revenue erosion is the major driver for our revenue erosion right now is the increase in projection in oil subsidy, which is supposed to go to about 4 trillion. And we know that is basically due to the increase in the oil price due to the Russia-Ukraine war, and of course thefts in the oil from the pipelines. We know that has also contributed to the increase in the oil price. And based on that, when the NNPC initially budgeted 3 trillion for the initially budgeted 3 trillion, but due to all these problems being envisaged and problems going on, now we are going to about 4 trillion, and that's almost about over 50% of our budget deficit. And typically when this kind of situation occurs, what happens? Either we go back to our drawing board to say, okay, how do we fund this deficit? So, of course, two major ways of funding the deficit is through loans, through debt, either we source it locally or foreign, and either we source it locally or foreign, or we sell assets. But Nigeria has opted to go through the debt approach to fund this deficit. And what that implies is that if you are not able to meet up with the budget, with the deficit, with the borrowings, what happens is that sometimes we have to go back to our drawing boards to look at the budget. How much have we earmarked for our expenditure? What we've seen typically in time past is that in Nigeria, nothing really happens to the revenue budget. Our government is quite faithful, to meeting its revenue budget. So what typically happens is that the capital expenditure that, gets some form of adjustment where we are not able to source for or get the loans we intend to get. If we are not able to get to the projection, then the capital expenditure tends to suffer. And when this happens, when the capital expenditure, gets hit by us not being able to borrow to meet up with our what we budgeted for, you see that, of course, it has a ripple effect on the economy. if we follow the news critically, we'll see that the government has said that there might be a bit of challenge in reaching its major milestones with respect to the railway project. And this because our counterpart, the Chinese counterparts, have reneged a bit on their own, providing their own funds. So we are looking for other partners to help us, achieve what we set for in terms of our railway project. And if this is not managed well, this might cause a bit of setback to us. And we know the state of our economy right now, that we need that capital expenditure to really take us to where we are going to. We need to spend more. So if the impact of this borrowing or increased borrowing has a lot of impacts on what we would achieve eventually if we don't get to meet up with this budget. So technically, what the area that might be affected more is not more of our revenue expenditure, but our capital projects might be affected if we don't meet this projected borrowings.
For me, you've given me another angle to this discussion now, saying that, that could be reviewed and all of that. But I want to ask that if we now eventually go ahead to borrow, which we might, do you think it is sustainable at this time? Many have talked about Nigeria's debt burden. Don't you think, do you think this is sustainable?
Well, so I'll give this analogy, right? Presently, our interest on loan is the interest to service the debt is about 80% of our revenue prior to the revised budget deficit, and this might go as high as 85%. That means if you give us a scenario example, say for instance, for every 1,000 naira we are going to spend, we are going to earn in revenue. That means we are going to use about 850 as spend that as interest on loan. And of course, if you take that even to your personal life, if you are earning 1,000 and you're spending 850 in terms of debt, then what is left for you is just something very minute. Bearing in mind that you have other responsibilities to meet. So I wouldn't say, in my own opinion, this is quite sustainable because the interest to our interest ratio to our revenue is quite high, and that is not quite sustainable. So we need to look for other means, either to increase our revenue or manage our debt servicing, or also look at other ways to bring down the interest on loan.
Let's now talk about revenue generation. I know you should be able to give some suggestions here to government, because it's key to the development agenda, infrastructure growth, and all of that, whichever way. What other sources do you think are available for government at this time to generate more revenue, to be able to at least achieve some of the ongoing projects as we move on?
Okay. Prior to now, we all know that Nigeria's major source of revenue used to be oil. We're quite dependent on oil, but there's a shift in focus right now from oil to non-oil sources of revenue. And one of the major non-oil source revenue, which the government, is focusing on, is on tax. And we'll see that based on the FIS chairman, the budget for tax, they said what it intends to generate as revenue is over 10 trillion naira. And what this suggests is that there's going to be increased, aggression on the part of the tax authority to get more money in. And we've seen that based on what we see happen in reality now, that definitely it's not business as usual with the tax authority. It's not both at the federal level, both at the state level. Everybody's seeking for ways to block tax leakages, increase compliance, and get more money in. And what this means for businesses is that they need to look at their books. They need to look at their compliance status in terms of tax. It's not business as usual to say, tax is just a one-off item in your books. No, the cost of not being compliant is quite high. So I would suggest that businesses need to take tax more seriously. And we've seen that a lot of businesses are actually doing that due to the revenue drive from the various tax authorities, whether at federal or state. And you see that the compliance, businesses need to be more compliant. They need to also look at their books ahead of time on how can they plan their affairs in such a way that they are not found culpable, or they are not found to be not to be compliant, and by such doing, they are losing so much money to non-compliance to the tax authority. So we would advise businesses to look critically into this. Don't wait to the last minute to get your filings done. Don't wait to the last minute, to do the right thing in terms of tax compliance. So there's so much drive, so much expectation in terms of what the government can generate from taxes. That's one way the government is looking at. And of course, there are other things the government also needs to look at to generate revenue for the economy. But I'll say from a tax focus, companies need to be more compliant in order to, in order not for the government to chase them or get money that they shouldn't have paid due to non-compliance.
Subsidy pops up again. I've spoken so much about subsidy even before now, before the PIB became PIA and all of that. But right now, the subsidy issue still remains in the front burner, and government needs to continue to pay until we're ready to totally deregulate or implement the PIA. What is the implication of this?
Okay. We all know that, there has been news, like in almost every administration, the fuel subsidy is going to be removed. And even last year, we all expected that, the fuel subsidy was going to be removed based on, the news. And I would say that we all know the implication as Nigerians, what it implies for us if we continue with this fuel subsidy. It's just that who has the political power to really bring this into action? Each time each administration comes, we've heard about this fuel subsidy, but I think there has not been political will to really address the issue, and it's from two sides. If they remove the fuel subsidy, some people are saying, maybe at each point, like the one that happened the last time, some people were saying it should be insensitive of the government to remove revenue, to remove the subsidy at that time, considering what is going on in the economy. Nigerians are not, Nigerians are going through a lot, but I would just like to say that we know the right thing to do as a nation. We know what to do. We know the impacts of fuel subsidy on our economy. Currently, fuel subsidy is about 4 trillion, which is over 50% of our budget deficit. So I believe we just need to look at the right direction and do the necessary thing we need to do in that regard.
Beautiful submission there, okay. Now, let me take you back just one step before we move forward. When we talked about tax, are you one of those that believe that we, instead of increasing taxes or across board, we could get in those in the informal space to become formal and get some money from them? There has been some argument in some quarters. I'd just like your reaction to that, if you think that can help us generate more revenue from taxation.
Yes, so of course, one of the things we've always said is expand the tax bracket. Right, so it's not just the likes of the large companies or medium companies that are, being forced to pay taxes, or you go back to this same set of people every time, and they are quite compliant, right? And you keep saying, this same set of people should be the ones paying the taxes. So I would say yes, we need to have like an all-inclusive participation in terms of taxes, bringing the informal sector, so that the burden is not so much on those people that are already complying, because we see quite a number of companies. I'm complying here, but it's as if the aggression is just more on those known companies or known enterprises already. So yes, one of the things we've said over and over again is we need to expand our tax bracket, and I believe the government is doing trying its best in that regard to bring in people in the informal sector, to bring in there are a lot of investment going on in terms of technology to see how we can improve the platform and increase the tax net. So it's something that I would say yes, it's very critical.
All right, let's now move on with the impact of all of these developments, both locally and internationally, all of the economic shocks, global shocks here and there, not forgetting Russia and Ukraine crisis. Some are actually beyond our control. What's your outlook for Nigeria's economic space going forward? All of the discussions around inclusive growth, are we likely to achieve that moving on?
Okay, so to answer that question, we all know what our GDP growth rate is. It's about between 3.5 to about 4%. Our population growth rate is about between 2.5 to about 3%, and our unemployment rate is currently about 30%. And to achieve the inclusive growth rate, of course, we need to look at what factors can we do to increase this GDP rate, for instance. What can we do? And if you look at it also, what can we do to ensure that the unemployment rate drops significantly? What can we do to ensure that our revenue generation, it increases and is not just dependent on a particular revenue. So if you look at it, yes, we all know what is going on with the Russia-Ukraine war. That has really affected the oil prices. That has affected food prices because Russia happens to be one of the largest exporter of it. And if you look at the impact this has had, is that their food prices have really gone up. And you also look at it that, yes, oil prices, when we did the budget, I think we benchmarked at about $62 or thereabout. But right now, the oil is trading for over $100. So how do we intend to, yes, we should have looked at that, yes, Nigeria should benefit really from the increase in oil price, but of course the subsidy is taking the benefits that we should have gotten from the increase in oil price, and also because we do not have refineries that are really working, so we are still largely dependent. Yes, we produce, but we still largely import refined oil. So what do we need to do to look at the economic outlook? How would this have impact? Yes, this should have been like a year where it should have been good because yes, COVID is easing off. But what we've seen is that the Russian-Ukraine crisis is like the new COVID, so to speak. Yes, we are not under lockdown, but the Russian-Ukraine crisis has really affected the global economy. So what we need to do, right, as a country, as businesses, is to go back to our drawing board. In 2020, a lot of businesses were looking at, how do we, even survive, or how do they sustain their business model? So we need to go back to that one mode we had in 2020 that gave us that resilience to push forward, and a lot of companies still survived it. We need to go to that same one mode back now. How do we go? We need to go back to the drawing board. How do we reorganize our businesses so that the impact of all the Ukraine-Russia crisis, yes, is not really impacting our business so in an adverse way that will take some businesses out of extension. And also say, for the government, we need to look at what are the new growth areas we need to focus on. For instance, the African Continental Free Trade Agreements. How are we positioning ourselves as a country to make Nigeria very attractive, to maximize the opportunity that is going to come up in this area? One other thing we also need to look at for our economic outlook is that, yes, a lot of we need to, in terms of our capital expenditure, we need to look at how to make that work. So that businesses are not. If look at the session we just had before now, is there's been the national grid has collapsed. A lot of companies, even with the increase in diesel right now, they are spending so much on power. How do we ensure we have the right infrastructural developments in place to encourage businesses to thrive amidst everything going on globally? So we need to look beyond the way we do businesses now, the way we are currently doing businesses. How do we ensure we support businesses to stay afloat? Because yes, if the businesses in Nigeria, they are doing well, it also help the economy also do well. So for government also, what are the ways we can increase our revenue beyond what we have currently? Yes, our projected revenue is about over 10 trillion. But how do we ensure we increase that? So we need to look for ways beyond this. Make the environment more safe. We can see that there's a lot of uncertainty in terms of the way the country is right now. There's a lot of security issues. And I know, based on what the budget spend is, government intends to spend quite a lot in terms of security, but we need to put that into action. Otherwise, investors will not, it will not boost investors' confidence if we keep having this kind of security challenges to come into the country. So we need to fix a lot of these things to support all-inclusive growth in the country.
Oheonu, who's the Senior Tax Manager, Tax Regulatory Services at Deloitte. Thank you so much for making sense of this topic for us. Do enjoy the rest of your day. Hope to see you sometime soon.
Thank you, Tolu.